Think forward. Think Research Channel.
I usually study in my dorm room.
If I study, it's usually in my room.
Usually I study at home.
Generally, I meet in the computer labs.
It's been a while since I used it. I probably checked out a book, but I don't really remember specifically when.
I used my campus library yesterday, but not really for library purposes. Had to print something out on their computers.
I used the campus library last semester for my research for my HCOM class, and I did find everything I needed, actually.
Last time I used the campus library was last semester for a research project, and yes, I found what I needed.
Probably 2 years ago.
Hello, and welcome to Ready2Net, an interactive roundtable focused on the challenges and opportunities that e-learning and information technology present to higher education. Today's program is titled Libraries, Coffee, and Surfing. We'll discuss the dramatic transition in the library in the past 2 decades from a venue defined by physical resources and physical space. When was the last time you visited your local or campus library? Well, for more than 2 centuries, beginning with the ancient library in 3rd century BC at Alexandria, Egypt, libraries have been centers for research and learning. During the mid-late 19th century and into the first decades of the 20th century, some university and municipal libraries also became impressive edifices. For example, the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, or the Widener Library at Harvard. More than a century ago, philanthropist Andrew Carnegie generously provided seed money for free municipal libraries for more than 2,800 cities and towns across the United States, England, and Ireland, including almost 2,000 in just the United States. Many were modest buildings in very small towns, buildings that today still house working libraries. While the internet and the web may have not changed everything about the library, they have certainly changed many things. As libraries go digital, any conversation about the library is bound by both physical space and a conversation about cyberspace. And the enforced silence of individual work at tables and corrals has morphed into the engaged sounds emanating from workgroup spaces in more and more libraries. Additionally, coffee shops, if not ubiquitous to college and university libraries, are no longer uncommon. Today's program will have 3 segments. In the first segment, we'll focus on libraries, users, and patrons. Segment 2 will take us into all things digital, resources, services, and archiving. In our closing segment, we'll discuss the impact of Google, Yahoo, and others on the current and future role of the library. I'm pleased to welcome our guests for this first segment. Sandra Rottenberg is the Access Services Librarian at Solano Community College. Sandra, welcome.
Thank you.
Karen Howell is the Director of the Undergraduate Learning Library at the Levy Library at the University of Southern California. Karen, thanks for joining us today. Ginny Steele is the University Librarian at UC Santa Cruz. Ginny, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Steve Watkins is the Coordinator for Technology Development for the new library at CSU Monterey Bay. Steve, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And panel, my thanks again to all of you for joining us today. Ginny, let's begin with you. So Santa Cruz is now 45, 50 years. Santa Cruz maybe was probably one of the last of the traditional research libraries, opened in the mid-60s. How's that library changed? I mean, think historically. Those first students in Santa Cruz today are probably eligible for AARP membership cards.
Yeah.
Some of those first students at Santa Cruz also today are probably middle or a little on the other side of middle career academics. What's changed about the library in Santa Cruz and the library program over those 40, 45 years?
Well, Casey, I would say there are 4 things that have changed about our library at Santa Cruz. Our collections have changed, our services have changed, our facilities have changed, and the expectations of our students and faculty have also changed. So those are things that libraries have done traditionally, and they're areas where we've seen a migration from what was done in the 1960s and
Physical media,
Yes,
Books,
physical
documents.
books to electronic in terms of our collections. Services have gone from being entirely based on somebody walking into the library and asking for help to us actually going out across campus and making assistance available in other ways, doing chat reference, email reference, and using different technologies for our services. Our facilities have changed greatly. As you said in the intro, students are working in different ways. They're working much more in groups, and they expect the library to provide facilities that enhance that group experience. They want to be able to use media. They want their coffee and to come to the library and spend some real time there. And then their expectations of how we deliver information to them have also changed. Even in the 60s and early 70s, people assumed that it was going to take time to get information. So they knew that if they wanted a book through interlibrary loan, it would probably be at least 3 weeks before they could get that book delivered to them. Now they expect it instantly. If they submit an interlibrary loan request, which they do electronically, they expect that they'll have that book, not necessarily a book, but a journal article, say, in a day.
So everything has changed in one sense. The four.
Everything has changed, but our values remain the same. And to paraphrase a former colleague of mine, Lynn Camiller, libraries are all about connecting people with information across space and time. And we did that before, and we still do that.
Let's cross space and time. Karen, the Levy Library at USC was designed late 1980s, early 1990s. It was designed as a technology-conscious library, even though it opened a little bit before the explosion of the web and the internet, say 1995, 1996. Designed as an undergraduate library. Thinking about the design in that library, as you were part of that design group, and thinking about the library today, how do those elements sort of map up against some of the things that Ginny's been talking about?
Well, I think we were very fortunate when we were designing it, because some of those principles that Ginny talked about, the changes, were really well set up to take advantage of, and it has helped us to flex and evolve over time. The expectations of the students in looking for information digital, Levy opened with 100 computers, and now we have about 250 computers. We opened with about maybe 10 to 12 group study rooms, and we have about 33 now. So we were able to expand some of our floors above. With one information commons, the demand was so high we had to open a second one. And even now I have student leaders coming in asking me to give us more computers or more group study space. Of course, we can't build another floor. That's what I was asking. Yes, the place did come from Stax. What we had to do was weed so that the electronic journals that are available now, we don't keep the print issues in our library anymore. Some of the materials that are electronic books or actually can be better used in other libraries, we have moved them off campus or to other libraries. And in turn, what we are doing is providing space for the students to work with digital materials. I will say one of the biggest changes since we opened in 1994 is that when we started, it was Gopher and it was very much text-based. And now we're very much into a multimedia world. Rich media imaging.
And Steve, Monterey's building a new library. So you've had the benefit of going to other places, watching other things, watching these transitions. What goes into the design of the library at Monterey that builds on, or perhaps maybe goes in a slightly different direction, some of the things that Ginny and Karen have talked about?
Right. I'd say that primarily in our conceptualization of the new building, we were building on and trying to combine the best of a lot of what other people have done and implemented. We're also very much aware that we're building literally a library facility for the 21st century. It's likely to have a lifetime as a facility of the entire 21st century. So we're approaching the design in, I think, what I call an evolutionary rather than a revolutionary way, in that we want the building to be able to adapt as users change and habits change.
Talked about moving Stax into workspace.
Very much so, right. Rather than trying to plan around some sort of current fad or way of doing things. We've also had the benefit of planning up front. You mentioned the change in the way that users are interacting in groups and such. Our campus pedagogy is very strong on active and collaborative learning, as many campuses are. And so we've had a chance to attempt up front with our design to make transparent to users the relationship between the layout, the ambiance, and their predominant styles of learning. So rather than having the quiet reading room with lots of people studying individually and groups needing to sequester themselves upstairs in group study rooms, we're planning the opposite, where we hope to have a lively and dynamic main area and then quiet space that develops as you go up the building.
Okay. Sandra, let's switch. Let's go from buildings to library users. Community colleges serve an incredibly heterogeneous population.
We do.
First-time college students, people coming back, 25%, 15 to 25% of community college students already have a college degree. How have community college library users changed over the last 10 years, or perhaps even over the last two? Last 2 decades? Well, last 10 years and even the last 2.
Last 2, I don't think there have been too many changes, just in terms of the type of student we get. We go from mid-high school to about 80.
Their expectations of the library services and resources?
Their expectations, or the way that they use the library, I think has changed a lot, because they come to the library now with much more complex questions. They get most of their first answers off the web themselves. So by the time we get them, they've already spent 5 or 6 hours being frustrated. So it's a whole different level of question. It's a whole different level of answer.
Interesting. Jenny, let's go back. Programming in libraries over this period of time. I was tempted, I wouldn't say this, but the 5 or 6 hours of being frustrated on screen, as opposed to some of us waiting 5 or 6 hours in line to get access for the appointments in an older, different mode of the library. How are the programming changing in libraries over this time? In terms of, the assumption is that because students can Google, they know library skills, they're information literate. We know that Googling and gaming skills don't represent IT literacy.
That's right. And in fact, there was a recent study done by, I believe it was Pew, that showed that students come to college with excellent skills in terms of recreational use of the web and social uses, but they don't understand how to find academic information, and they don't understand where the web fits in this universe of information that's available.
So the kind of programming that some of us who are older, myself, used to miss that freshman orientation tour of the library, it's even more important to do it now than it used to be a long time ago?
I would say definitely it is, but it's not just the tour of the physical
it's
plant.
the physical tour, but it's the introduction to resources.
And to begin to understand this broad range of information resources that exist. I think a well-educated student should graduate from college understanding that there is a universe of information out there, and they need to know how to navigate in that world.
Karen, you talked a little bit about some of the space changes at Levy. What about the programming changes at Levy over this period of time, from the opening in 1994, 1995?
Right. I think some of the early programming that we had taught students how to think about doing term papers, and that's evolved. It's gotten much more complex now, because many students come in from college having access to one electronic database, perhaps. What's different now is helping them understand, as Jenny said, the whole universe of materials. So the kinds of work we have to do now is more one-on-one research consultations, setting up appointments, or doing chat online. And it's letting them know, instead of one database, maybe you have hundreds to choose from. How are you actually going to navigate that and actually evaluate the information that you pull out from there?
So it still sounds like the librarians are providing kind of a high-touch role for guidance into a high-tech world. Sandra, is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment.
Steve, you looked like you were about to say.
Right, yeah, I think planning for instructional space and interactions with libraries is really important. The other aspect, I think, as we're seeing reflected in some of the student comments, is taking that out to them where they are, so that those that aren't physically in the library space have some connection to the library, but access to those resources within the context they're working. And incorporating that kind of information literacy into that activity is, I think, a real challenge for us.
I'm struck by Ginny's comment about immediacy. I remember, as many do, the days of waiting for an interlibrary loan, or the mediated search. You went to a desk, hooked out thesaurus terms, somebody did a search. The fact that many of us can now do this, we may not do it well, but we feel we can do it on our own. But it still sounds like many librarians are still doing this kind of, I want to come back to this kind of high-touch guidance and assistance, despite the kind of surface or superficial skills. Is that a reasonable assessment, Sandra?
Well, you have to. I mean, the students definitely come in thinking that Google is easy to use.
Right.
But when you're looking at research, it's not.
Yeah. Does that apply to does that go to faculty as well, Ginny?
I think
Absolutely.
so.
I think that there are faculty, regardless of their age, who are very sophisticated users, but there are others who didn't acquire the skills along the way or have not kept up, and we need to help them as well.
I think actually some of the older students are better at research, even using the online resources, than the younger students are, because they have some conception of what they're looking for. They understand the structure of an academic paper or a book or a journal, whereas the students, all they see are websites, and they think that a journal is a website. They think that a magazine is a website. They think that a library is a website. So you get a lot of confusion from the younger students where you don't get that confusion. The older students need more tools.
Well, it suggests about the validity of content that anything on the web.
Yes.
Perhaps younger students a larger proportion of younger students may be more willing to accept as valid and accurate content.
Much more gullible.
Something
I think
on the web.
concept of peer review, because you know, librarians understand and faculty members understand when something has been vetted, but students coming in don't know. When you look at an article on the screen, there's nothing to tell you whether this is a white paper from a think tank or whether this is just a page from a newspaper article or whether this is a journal article that's gone through peer review. There are many different forms, and when it was physical, you could see the package, you could see the typeface, and you could see the name of the publisher. On screen, all you see is the text, and there's more to teach students in understanding the context of where that information came from.
That raises some interesting questions given the Ready to Net program we did a couple of weeks ago about the authenticity of blogging. As you think about how blogging now becomes a force on the web as well for documentation, particularly in the news cycle, and how quickly that goes and how some students may gravitate to that. You know, how do librarians, you know, what does a librarian say to the student who says, well, it's a blog, it's got to be accurate, right? It's on whatever the blog is.
Who wrote it?
Who wrote it?
Right. Who wrote it? What's their authority? Okay. What do they know? And
so,
why do you
my
believe
blog
them?
wouldn't be credible, is that right?
Absolutely not.
I just want to understand. Let's go, Sandra?
F.
F. Okay.
But Casey, there's another angle to this that I think is important, and that is that most people don't realize that there's a lot of information that can be accessed through the web that is licensed by libraries. It's really private information, and we pay these license fees and we make this information available to our campus communities. And that means that our students have the benefit of being able to use this material, but they don't even really often realize it. And so they don't know that if they're at home, say before they enter college and they're doing research on a topic, say writing a paper about something, and they try to look it up on Google, they will get a very different set of information and have different access than they will once they get to college.
Right, see?
To add on to that, the fortunate development is Google Scholar, which, with all its imperfections, does attempt to capture and index the scholarly literature. And there are partnerships now that allow us to build links into the results in Google Scholar that do lead our users back to that licensed content, the more high quality, authoritative content. So let's
think about the evolution of the library. Steve, you said Monterey's building what will be a 21st century library. Levy built what it was going to be into the 21st century library. Others are retrofitting their libraries with new parts of the infrastructure. Clearly, it's not enough to say you have a 21st century library because there's computers in the library. That game is over. It's other parts of it. What are the elements, what are the hallmarks, building notwithstanding, named architect notwithstanding, what are the hallmarks of a library, an impressive library, a distinctive library for the 21st century? Sandra, at a community college, what's the distinctive community college library going to look like over the next, or evolve into?
Boy, that's a great question. SRJC, Santa Rosa Junior College, just built a gorgeous new library with lots of group spaces. Well, but it's the thinking that goes into it. It's the fact that most of the spaces can be used multiple ways. There's a lot of flexibility built in. They've thought about going forward, so they've thought that they might have to change the use of some of the rooms. It's not as book intensive, although books are definitely there. Lots of different computing spaces, lots of group spaces, so somewhat similar to what they're talking about, although, of course, community college is usually on a bit smaller scale.
And Steve, you're at the other end. You have the opportunity to start with a reasonably clean slate on a clean patch of land.
Right. I'd say one of the things that we're doing that we hope will be successful is actually some partnerships Libraries tend to stand alone on many campuses, with actually the glaring exception of many community colleges. So we're actually looking, I think, at trying to turn what's generally been an information commons into a learning commons by inviting into the building our peer tutoring program, our writing center, our assistive technology program, the first year experience and such. So I'm hoping that the synergy between those different types of things will actually result in a new kind of library for
And
our
Ginny,
users.
21st century research library at research universities like Santa Cruz and others, what will be the distinctive elements?
Well, to pick up on what Steve said, the focus is on learning and how the library can support learning, both individual learning and group learning.
More active than passive.
Yes, exactly. And so, and learning is a social activity. So we not
We
only
used to be sanctioned for that in libraries, didn't we?
We did, but we've gone to the opposite end of the spectrum on that. And now I think we call out where we have the quiet study areas, and the assumption then is, as Steve was saying, that the communal areas are the areas where talking is encouraged.
I need to touch on one other area before because we're coming to a close on this thing. What about the library budget? Again, computers are
Never
how is
enough.
Yes, never enough. You can never recover from the fact that somebody steals money from the book fund. Notwithstanding, and the infrastructure about the fact that computers have to be replaced and some other kinds of things. Structurally, how has the library budget changed over what it might have been 15 or 20 years ago into this new 21st century library?
I can tell you one of the
Yeah.
things that we had to change. I'll tell you the unglamorous first, and then the more glamorous. The unglamorous is that we need to spend more money on the facilities to upgrade the electricity and the network drops, because we might not have enough computers, though we have a lot. But what the big demand is for is access to the net. And so first it was the first part of our years was adding more and more internet connections. Now it is adding more and more high-speed wireless connections. You can't have enough of either. And just because you have high speed wired connection in one area, to follow up on something you're saying, the reason we're interested in space is how space is configured affects what you can do, what kind of activities people can engage in, and it can be either a help or a hindrance. So wireless in many areas allows people to congregate naturally or work individually.
Other things that have changed dramatically. Sandra? I'm sorry, Ginny?
Well, I think the way libraries budget now is different in that there are other services that we provide, printing from the electronic resources, so we have to budget for those. And in many cases, we have to figure out how to make those self-sustaining operations, which puts us into a different kind of business than we used to be in.
And you're spending certainly larger sums of money for licensing digital content, citation indexes, and other kinds of bibliographic materials. And in a community college library, Sandra?
I'm not as up on the budget of the community college libraries.
Okay, fair enough. Look, Steve, you're starting with a clean slate. I mean, what are you learning that you're going to have to change, real quickly? Because
basically, we started off with electronic journals almost exclusively from the beginning, and a small and growing book collection. And I think we've seen some convergence, where even the larger libraries have had to pare back their print journals and redirect some of those resources into the electronic digital content you're mentioning.
All right. We're actually, unfortunately, drawing to a close on this first segment of today's program. I want to give you each an opportunity to make a kind of a last closing comment. Either circle back to something you've said, or perhaps something you feel you want to add and make sure that it becomes part of the record of this program. Steve, let me begin with you. A quick closing thought?
Well, we hope that the library as place is still important, and that we find creative ways to take that place and our services out to the users is what I would close with.
Ginny.
And I think we value our users and their time, which seems to be more and more precious these days. And the library tries very hard to have collections and services that make it possible for students and faculty to be as efficient as possible.
Well, I think libraries of the future, what will determine our survival is the ability to really hone in on what people need and to create partnerships to provide that.
And Sandra?
I think future of libraries is going to be pretty rosy, actually, as long as we stay focused on our core goal of helping students get what they need and faculty, and I think we do a pretty good job of it.
Interesting. I'm just reflecting on my own experience about how that library experience has changed dramatically. for myself and for my children, and as I suspect all of you, and for our students. It is really one of the most dramatic changes on any part of a college campus over the last 30, 40 years. Great. All right. Well, my thanks to our panel members for this first segment, to Karen Howell from USC, Sandra Rotenberg from Solana Community College. I'm missing my cues. Ginny Steele from UC Santa Cruz, and Steve Watkins from CSU Monterey Bay for their insights about the changing nature of libraries, library patrons, and library budgets. We'll be back in a few minutes to continue our conversation about the future of libraries, focusing the discussion in the next segment on all things digital. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Ready to Net. The second segment of today's program will focus on all things digital. We'll talk about what happens to the library and to library users when the traditional collected assets, books, documents, and other physical resources are converted to digital formats, and how these conversions change library services, structures, programming, as well as user training and support. Our panelists for the second segment are Leslie Guy Buckelew, Director of Worldwide Education at Adobe. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Karen Howell stays with us for the second segment. Again, she's with the Levy Library at the University of Southern California. Karen.
Thank you.
Rob Spindler is the University Archivist at Arizona State. Rob, welcome to Ready to Net.
Thanks, Casey.
And Art Pasquinelli is the Education Market Strategist at Sun Microsystems. Art, thanks for joining us today.
Casey.
All right, panel, thanks for all being here. We're going to start talking, as I said, about all things digital, books, documents, reference resources, photographs, everything, right? All seems to have gone digital. Seems like anybody with a broadband connection feels they should be able to get whatever they want, whenever they want it. The comment that was made by one of the earlier panelists, I think Ginny Steele, about the immediacy. None of us want to wait for anything. So that said, and the fact that there's so much that seems to be on the screen for so many of us these days, what's the role of the library in this world of all things digital? And Rob, I'm going to start with you. You're the archivist at Arizona State.
Indeed.
That world of archiving goes well beyond just the library. How have things changed over the last 10 years, and has there been even other special changes in the last 2, Rob?
Well, I think in general there's been a greater sense of urgency amongst archivists in the profession, and we are looking for an increased activity and advocacy, and also more aggressive collection development, because individuals we used to work with at the end of their careers would tend to deliver us obsolete materials, obsolete file formats, obsolete media, media with no metadata attached to it, and we can't always save those things that people deliver to us when they are obsolete.
I wanted you to back up. For the civilians in our audience, metadata. Many of us hear that term. What does it really mean?
Metadata is data about data, or information that describes information. Okay. In the scenario I just described, we might think in terms of media labels that tell us what software is required to use the information.
All right, that's great. So there's all this stuff. So you're saying in what sense the urgency is in this earlier process? Faculty members saving drafts? Is that part of it as well, the way writers used to save drafts of manuscripts?
Well, archivists are trying to get more involved in the process of creation, so we can have a conversation with the creators of digital materials, talk to them about their methods, and try to help them find methods that are more sustainable.
Leslie, creation of digital materials, that sounds like a lot of stuff that people do with Adobe products. The PDF document is ubiquitous. Many think of that, oh, it's PDF, it solves Rob's problem. Standard format, it will be with us forever. Does the PDF solve that archiving problem that Rob thinks about in some ways?
Well, I certainly hope so. Since '93, when we first came out with the PDF format, it sort of shook things up a bit, and I think there was a little bit of a slow adoption, but as you said, it's ubiquitous. It's on 98% of every computer in the world at this point. So people being able to communicate with one another and sharing, a file format that works for everyone from a reader perspective is there. I think the next generation is going to be about creative co-creation, not only archiving, but creating documents, sharing them together, and also looking about security. Even the IRS early on in the 90s, or mid to late 90s, adopted the PDF format for communication, which is interesting. I don't know what that says, but...
I want to bounce back to Rob on this one, though, for a moment. But Rob, part of what the archivist does, I'm thinking about particularly with writers, but we see with other things as well, is you see things as they evolve over time. If the PDF is the public document, the way the published book used to be the document, what do we lose when we lose those iterative digital drafts in one sense.
This is part of this conversation that we really need to have with curators to talk about what is significant about that creative process. Can you help us identify the versions of these things that were particularly important? We don't want to look at copy editing, but we want to look at meaningful changes to those materials and find those most important things to preserve.
And all these drafts, all these PDF documents, all these documents that get scanned, you know, whether it's the stuff that's created originally in a digital format or stuff that gets converted, requires storage. You're talking with a lot of folks about storage, which seems to be the next, to some degree, the next frontier for libraries and for academic communities as well. What do we need to understand about the storage challenge that confronts us?
Well, it's pretty comprehensive. Basically, a lot of people in the areas of internet archiving, e-research, preservation, and archiving are all struggling with very many of the same issues around preservation and long-term archiving. In that, what are the file formats? How do you keep them? What happens to bit rot? Okay, we've lost many of the movies that were produced before 1940 are just gone now. So these are really physical issues that people have to grapple with. Secondly, you have things like the total cost of ownership and the architectures around nearline, offline, online. So how do you architect that foundation technology for a long-term preservation strategy? So a lot of the librarians and archivists in the world today are saying we need to go to open standards, open technologies. We can't bet on proprietary technologies because we're preserving things for 50, 100, 200 years. And these are the kind of issues we work with national libraries and state libraries on all the time.
Colleges and universities are highly decentralized. Academics act often on their own. We don't have the kind of command and control. It seems like almost every college or university library in the country and any museum, they're all launching digital asset collections. I'm thinking, for example, the Civil War collection, the Valley of the Shadows, Fred Ayers at Virginia. It's an incredibly powerful collection of contemporaneous documents, of seeing in real time for the population at that time what was going on in these two valleys during the war between the states. Highly decentralized. I mean, some of the same issues that come back in other parts of IT about the decentralization. What goes on in terms of thinking about these decentralization issues as well in terms of asset management and storage and standards?
Well, on a university, if you look at a university as a knowledge enterprise, you have a lot of distributed access points for content coming from the academic institutions, also coming from the department libraries. Okay, so many times you need the centralized function of a central library to work on the preservation issues, to work on the very much the collaboration issues that are evolving right now, and the e-research arena where you want to collaborate on a global basis securely and in a very secure, scalable manner. So this is where a lot of the IT issues come in. How do you take all this content and how do you redistribute it? So things like identity management and access issues become just as important, and content management could become just as important as the preservation and the storage issues.
And Karen, the role of librarians in this kind of decentralized, these decentralized collections which really speak to digital asset management, which speak to some of the archiving issues that concern Rob. How are librarians adjusting to this, another shift in their roles?
Well, I think there's two ways that librarians are adjusting. One is working more collaboratively with them at the beginning of setting up the archives.
Working with faculty and
That's
folks
right.
on research projects.
That's right. You know, in terms of making them aware of what some standards are and offering advice and offering help and perhaps working with them to write grants together. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that once the digital archive is created, really the proof is when people use it, whether it's for long-term research or whether it's for short-term instructional assignments. And that's where I think librarians have a very strong role to play. We at USC have been working with Bruce Zuckerman, who has been working with digital images of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he's offering his undergraduate students very great research opportunities. And so we support them by giving them places and help so that they learn how to co-create these digital creations, so that we have multimedia prize-winning research pieces being created in our library and also displayed on our digital plasma screens so that people are aware of the resources and the opportunities they have to work with these primary resources.
Is it fair to infer from what you're all saying that to some degree that these digital assets are creating new levels of collaboration between students and faculty that we didn't see before in some sense?
I think it's much more challenging for the students, and also in one sense much more rewarding, because it deals along with this idea about student-centered learning. The students are actually digging in and working with these materials as opposed to listening to somebody lecture to them about them and showing them images. They're actually examining the images themselves and learning to draw their own conclusions and defend a statement that they make.
But Leslie, I'm also thinking, for example, of a video at Drexel many years ago. Drexel was actually the first campus to issue Macs in the wake of right after the Mac, as part of the Apple University Consortium announcement in 1984. There was a great image in the midst of this documentary of a student and a faculty member. Faculty member, I later learned, was a couple months away from retiring. The student was a freshman. The student was teaching the faculty member how to do Multiplan, which was at that time the one spreadsheet available. The faculty member was teaching the student about accounting. And you know, our inferences and assumptions notwithstanding that students may be able to teach some of the digital technologies to faculty members are sharing this other stuff. These collaborations are now increasingly have to be embedded in the kinds of tools that Adobe and others are bringing to market. Yes?
Absolutely. And we use the term engagement platform at Adobe, which I think is really tied nicely to learning, because learning is about engaging the learner. That's to induce to participate. And the digital collaboration capabilities now are there to do these things, you know, in the same room, or to do them across, you know, the worldwide, you know, infrastructure as we know it. We're really excited about the collaborations, and as you look for young people, I've got 3 college kids, they're all doing their own publishing. That's what they expect to do. Students expect to publish, create, and share content. So I think it's incumbent on colleges and universities to facilitate this shared collaboration, and then sharing the resources of, you know, the work that's coming out. But I think the world has really changed. I mean, it's a different world now.
Collaboration art also means storage and more people having access to resources across institutions.
Exactly.
Yeah, and are you finding as you work with both your campus clients and others that are bringing that kind of technology, that that's a high priority?
It's a very high priority. How do you link all these disparate databases, disparate physical sites, and put them into a front-end portal, okay, a secure front-end portal. It's very important. And then deliver that information to a very mobile type of user base that could be a researcher, could be a student, could be a faculty member, and could be an administrator or another librarian. How do you distribute that so the content is always connected with the users? It's very important. You start getting into issues of digital rights management, you start getting into issues of identity management that we discussed before, and also the whole architecture that you develop around this is you can't have all your digital assets in one place. So a lot of librarians, even though some of these materials may be accessed all the time, some of the materials may be accessed rarely, you have to make sure they're safe. So that's what a lot of people, you know, like Robert, trying to deal with all the time. How do you keep that authentic material safe?
Let me talk about something else, about the notion of safety that you've introduced. There seems to be an assumption that all these digital asset management projects are almost preordained to succeed. You know, Acme College announces it's going to create a digital library on X. A department's going to do Y. These are big splashy announcements. And again, nobody, you know, a lot of it, often what we see is the headlines, and then we don't see the work. It's just like being in the sausage factory. And yet there's a kind of things, you know, there's sort of the underground message about what actually is going on at Acme College with that high visibility project. Rob, do these projects succeed? I mean, are they all preordained? Is it easy as just the press release and then just scanning stuff?
Well, I think what we would want to do is make some sort of cost-benefit analysis to determine whether these things should live, because ultimately they do require resources for their maintenance over time.
Well, what are the metrics of a successful project? I mean, for example, is it number of books or number of documents? Is it the expanded access to a core group or secondary or other kinds of users? Are there some other metrics, licensing revenue? I mean, how do we go about, for different audiences, to say this is a successful project in terms of building these libraries?
Well, we like to think in terms of assessment by looking at, you know, how do we ultimately impact the bottom line of colleges and universities? How do we improve education? How do we facilitate research? And can we develop measures that actually demonstrate that? Can we look at the numbers of publications that result from use of a particular object? Can we look at the number of Blackboard instances of the use of these particular objects? And so ultimately what we try try to do is find some measures that connect our operation to the greater purposes of universities in instruction and research.
I want to come back though, but push a little bit. How do you measure the success of these projects? They can't all succeed, or intuitively. I'm also mindful of what I hear from people in the library community about the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the traffic is in 20% of the collection. I don't know if that, or at least that used to be the day of the physical collection. Does that, Karen, carry through in the online collection as well, the 80-20 rule?
Well, certainly when you're looking for full-text documents, there are certain databases that are very highly used, all the ones with the full-text newspaper and journal articles. But I want to get back to that assessment. There is also qualitative measures of success. One example I'd like to use about an archive is one that was co-created, again working with Bruce Zuckerman, where we did digitized images of cylinder seals, which are a way of indicating signatures in the days when they would roll them on wet clay. Well, one measure of success is that the class was taught by 2 students, both at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and University of Southern California. They created some research. They submitted their, respectively to the 2 different universities, their research results to an undergraduate research symposium and won awards in their particular area for humanities. I think that you won't say that we win 1,000 prizes, but for that particular archive that's created, I think that one measure speaks for itself about the value of it.
Archives also lead to the question of services. Who has access to all this new stuff that we can in theory provide to more? Now, I'm thinking about, again, it's all sitting on the server, differentiated services. There's some significant issues about digital right management that many of us see it at the top level, the kind of peer-to-peer thing in terms of music and film on campus and consumer networks. But there's some other issues about who owns stuff and how do you manage the traffic, say if it's the University of California system, it might be the Library of Congress as more and more material is being digital, or for example even Google and the Google Books or other kinds of projects. When different entities claim digital rights authority for different kinds of content, are we going back? Now some of us can remember a time when in fact libraries used to have for-fee services, bibliographic searches and other kinds of things. Are we going back to that kind of world with some of these collections, Art? I mean, can we imagine that access to these specialized collections, to these archives, could that come back again, where we've gone from free to now premium for-fee?
We may be, but I think what technology allows us today to do is look at those pieces of content, those learning objects, and allow them to be priced differently for maybe someone who's a student in your academic institution versus someone who's outside doing for-pay research. So I think the capabilities of being able to access a wider body of knowledge outweigh a lot of things. This is a work in progress, Casey. I think we'd all agree there that there's different ways of looking at things, and I'll defer to some of the librarians here to address the fair use issues. But I do realize that people are going to have to know technologically, how do you authenticate a person, how do you identify them, how do you authorize them for access to different right levels of whatever object goes in. And a lot of the national libraries, state libraries, and big academic institutions that are doing ingest of massive amounts of content, whether it's newspapers or e-research, they're having to figure out how you do the ingest and put the digital rights management capabilities right on them at the front end. So that's a big issue a lot of librarians are trying to face right now. Rob, librarians, archivists dealing with this digital right management issue?
Absolutely.
How big a concern?
It's a big concern, especially as we look at wide collaborations where the ownership of the product may not be established early on in the research process.
And Leslie, again, thinking about sort of the creation of these tools, the mashups, you know, that whether it's a faculty member's syllabus, which we pull from different sources, or the kinds of things that students and faculty might do with all kinds of media. The collaborative tools, the kind of technology tools that are increasingly coming to market. What do we do with that about digital rights management?
Well, I think there's a lot in place, and certainly Adobe's been concerned about security, as have a number of other software providers, and you have the opportunity to set your own parameters in terms of who reads it, who accesses your content. A comment that Rob made earlier in the program had to do with watching the drafts flow through, and the nice thing on the most recent iteration of our Acrobat product, Acrobat 8, you can actually track, through all of these pieces with every single person who annotates or touches the document in any form. This is good. Now you have trackability. Now you know where the document's flowing from and what's the history and the source, and also some control if you like. But I would like to say one thing is that I think accessibility in a higher education setting, accessibility for all, and being able to have ease of distribution is pretty top on my list in terms of sharing information.
Was this kind of tracking that you're talking about, the kind of new kind of footnoting in one sense that many of us grew up with?
You know, it might be. You know, where does the source come from, and who's?
It's not only a journal citation, but it's the metadata that says where did this come from.
That's right.
Okay. And then, Karen, this kind of circles back to what student attitudes towards digital content. There's lots of evidence to say that if we particularly look at the controversial peer-to-peer issue about movies and music on campus networks, there's some data from a number of sources to say that students think that things should be free. Does this now take us back to librarians as being at the front line of digital rights respect in some sense in library programs?
Well, I think that can certainly be wrapped into the information literacy, which is what many librarians do when we work with faculty members in teaching classes, not only teaching them about how to find resources, but to evaluate the content, but also to understand about property rights. And one way we've discovered that really helps students understand it is as they're creating materials themselves, they start having a vested interest in understanding they want their own rights protected as well. I can give you an example. We've worked with a political science faculty member where they are creating political commentaries to place on YouTube as an exercise in learning how to express opinions and attract commentary and attention on the internet. And the students, after I gave them a lecture about intellectual property and copyright, were very, very careful because they wanted to have their work seen. So they wanted to protect their rights and also respect the rights of others so that they could very definitely have a successful placement on YouTube.
Interesting. Are you working with a lot of students who do YouTube placements?
Well, from what I heard, we just finished that assignment 2 days ago, and the faculty member told me the students took it seriously, and some of them took it out of the protected class area on YouTube, posted in the public, and are very, very happy because they're attracting a lot of hits.
They're now celebrities.
Yes.
Let's turn back to one other part of this, and that's the permanency of things. We went through libraries for a number of years. We're focused on the acid paper problem. Books that we thought were permanent, in fact, were slowly deteriorating. 8-inch floppies to 5-inch floppies to different kinds of media, to CDs to DVDs to Blu-ray, servers, everything else. How do we handle, once things go digital, what's the preservation challenge of duration? Are we looking at 80 years, 100? I mean, how formats, media, permanency? Art, let me come back to you on this one in terms of just sort of the physical preservation of digital images on different media servers to begin with. How do we know that something's going to be accessible? Let's assume that Acrobat format will survive for 150 years. How do we pull it off a server that's 150 years old, for example? That may be pushing it a bit, but what do we do about actually preserving that digital format?
It's a really big issue. It's a very big issue because you have the data, you have the application or the format it was written in, and you actually have the equipment that it was stored and delivered on.
Let alone the equipment it has to migrate to for later reading.
Exactly. And I know museums, for instance, that have museums within the museum of old photographic and computer systems because they have to keep one of everything to be able to deliver it. It's a very big effort. That's why we've been working very much in the community realm, trying to put together some of the lead academics and national libraries to start discussing how do we do this, because it's going to have to be a community standards-based decision. Everybody's trying to cross the chasm at the same time. But this area of permanency and authenticity of the data that we do keep, and what is the authentic data versus the stuff that we allow accessed and augmented, is a very big issue. I think it's probably an issue the two of you dealing with every day.
Rob, permanency?
Well, I would suggest there is no permanency. All of these things have to be actively managed, and we make choices along the way on where we expend our resources to get that done. Ultimately, because of the march of technology, it always changes, and the solution we make today is going to be obsolete 5 years from now. So it's a matter of continuing research and development and the will to preserve.
So it sounds as much we're going to be continually re-preserving as a civilian, could I say that? We're going to be re-archiving stuff that we thought we had digitized and preserved once, even as we continue to add?
We'll have to march through changes and migrate content in terms of file formats and software compatibility from now to the end of time.
There's no magic wand that we can just do the automatic digital updates?
I don't believe so.
Not yet.
And I would like to second that. Yeah, we do talk to people all the time, universities in particular, that you have obsolescence around the application, obsolescence around the software, obsolescence around the people that are leaving your organization, the skill set.
Yeah.
So it's a very big issue that it completely has to be completely updated all the time.
Yeah, imagine finding a WordStar user today with 8-inch discs to kind of bring back an old manuscript for updating. Daunting challenge, yes? Okay, well, great. We need to close this segment of our program, and my thanks to the four of you. I want to give you one last chance. So last 10, 15-second comment before we close. Leslie?
Well, we've been at PDF for about 14 years, going on 15. I think that it will be around for some time, and I do think the fact that things have been digitized is much better for everybody, and we're moving into a brave, bold new world where students and the world really wants to engage with information and concepts and ideas, and I think we need to just be prepared to share the information.
Right. Karen?
Right, and I think that libraries and librarians have a very great role in helping students work with these new digital materials, evaluate them and use them in new ways, but also have the same values of what the learning and research really means.
Great. And Rob, last thought?
Ultimately, archivists need access to the technology that will enable them to preserve these materials, and quite often the people that create materials have better technology than we do to preserve it.
Great. Art, last thought, last comment.
No, I think the role of the library is going to change, but I think it's going to be as central or more central than ever as a collaborative resource for the academic institution.
Well, that's good to know. I think many of us like libraries, right? All right, good. and digital adds value to the library, we hope. Okay. My thanks to the four of you, to our panel for this portion of the program: Leslie Guy Buckelew, Karen Howell, Art Pasquinelli, and Rob Spindler. We'll be back after a short break for the final segment of today's Ready to Net program: Google, Yahoo, and others. Welcome back to Ready to Net. The final segment of today's program addresses the role of Google, Yahoo, and IT firms that are venturing, some might say are already embedded, in an array of traditional library services. How will pervasive, some might add all too convenient, access to digital content and archives improve services to faculty and students? Our panel members for this third segment are Ginny Steele, University Librarian at UC Santa Cruz; Sandra Rotenberg, Access Librarian at Solano Community College. Sandra. Mike Miller, who's Dean of Libraries at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo; and Gil Gonzalez, CIO at CSU Monterey Bay. Pardon me. I should add that we extended an invitation to Google to participate in today's Ready to Net program, but that invitation was declined. All right, so panel, it seems, no question, the elephant in the room is Google, isn't it? I mean, for all practical purposes, when we talk about the future of libraries, and it's search, as reflected by Google, Yahoo, Ask, Live Search from Microsoft, other kinds of online resources. These are free services that provide all of us with incredible access to an amazing and rich array of resources from our desktop, the immediacy that Ginny, you had talked about in a previous segment. Mike Miller, how is search changing the role of the library?
Well, you know, it may feel like Google and some of the others are an elephant that we have to deal with, but it's probably because libraries really aren't used to dealing with large corporate entities. I think it's actually one of a number of things that are going on that are going to allow libraries to totally reconceptualize how they do business.
For example?
Well, I think one of the things that occurs to me is that previously students really had to learn our systems and be in our space.
Right.
And now the shoe is on the other foot. Libraries have to learn how to be in Google space, the student space.
Ginny, is search the elephant in the room, elephant in the building in libraries these days?
Well, I think it's definitely changing the way information is made available, but I think that libraries have always been in the business of helping people connect with the information they need. And so whether we're talking about information that's stored on a printed page or a handwritten manuscript or an image or something that's on Google that's been digitized, the point is really to make sure that that information is accessible. It first of all is findable, then it's accessible, and then it's preserved over time. So I think the role of the library is there around the information. It's not so tied up in the fact that Google or some other commercial firm is making it available in electronic format.
Yeah, but we think about students these days. They go to wikis, they go to search, Google, the most obvious, but certainly there are others. Some of the other resources that are on the web, they come to campus thinking that they know these skills. Sandra?
They do come to campus thinking that they know these skills, and in fact they do know these skills. They're pretty good at Googling. They just aren't very good at recognizing necessarily what they find when they get there.
Yeah.
But I also don't think it's necessarily an elephant. I mean, an elephant in the room intimates that you're not talking about it. And I think libraries are doing nothing but talking about Google and search and how to adapt and how to Googleize ourselves. I mean, one of the things that we are good at is we have tons of information. And Google is showing us a lot of different ways to search that information. If we can use some of their technologies in our catalogs and in our journals databases, then we'll be much happier. I mean, I don't think we're fighting them.
Gil, you're building a new library at Monterey Bay, though. You know, to use Sandra's term, what does it mean for libraries to Googleize themselves?
Well, libraries, like a lot of organizations, are really adapting and borrowing technology from internet providers. And Google, Yahoo, and others clearly understand that they can capture market share and extend services out through products like Google Docs and through the search engine themselves. It's complementary for libraries and others to use that technology. IT organizations are doing it too. Several states are using these products as well to make sure that their content is accessible. So in that sense, we all want to use the right tools to get the work done. It's probably more important that it's done effectively. So I think the role of the librarians, the role of IT organizations oftentimes turns into doing things that are efficient and effective given what we think our business problems are.
But does that experience, Mike, sort of raise a different set of expectations because so many come to campus now with experience at Google, as opposed to learning about how, you know, what used to be perhaps in high school and hopefully by fresh undergraduate experience in college, how to begin to do research. In fact, like everything else, students come to campus with a lot of these experiences that drive their expectations.
That's true. That's why I think libraries have to adapt to this new world. I mean, even if we put students aside for a moment and acknowledging that their methods of acquiring information are very, very different from ours, talk to faculty. Faculty very often are going to Amazon to do their searches as opposed to coming to the library first. And in fact, if we were really honest with ourselves and had talked to faculty enough, we probably would have found that when they started a research project, they didn't turn to the library first. They picked up the phone in the old days and spoke to colleagues. Now they email each other. They have a whole informal network. That's how they get going. Later on, they start to do the deeper digging. And we have the tools to let them do that very well. But we've now got to adapt to the students and their expectations.
Well, that adopting to expectation issue, what does that say about then the changing role of the librarian? We talked a little bit with the other two panel groups about a kind of merging of this, the convergence again of kind of high-tech, high-touch. In other words, that the librarians were taking on a high-touch role in a high-tech environment driven by the technology, and for our conversation right now, search. Google, but others are in that environment as well. Sandra, you know, for frontline librarians, we think about the access librarians, the reference librarians, at both research universities and at community colleges and all, how does that search experience change the expectations of clientele, and how does that change the kind of the interaction of librarians with students and faculty?
It creates the expectation that our services should be as easy to use as Google. So one of the things that we do, no, absolutely not.
Okay.
Not even close. Although I will say that you get what you ask for in our services, whereas you do not necessarily get what you ask for in Google, and you may not know how to use Google properly to get what you're asking for.
But, let me push on that a little bit. The librarians and faculty like to talk about the serendipity of the stacks. I'm looking for a particular book, and because something happens to be within that same range. Isn't there a kind of a serendipity in search, that same kind of accidental serendipity?
Sometimes, and also library catalogs are going with next book on the shelf. So you're finding catalogs, some of them, especially in the bigger institutions, are moving to allow you that serendipity online as well. Well, I'm probably hogging this discussion, but I don't think that there is as much serendipity with the search engines as there is on a bookshelf.
Yeah, and Ginny, the role of librarians in this environment again, with so many come with an expectation of search, and as Sandra said, we're not as good as Google in terms of some of the stuff that we're doing.
Well, I think one thing we have to do is recognize that our users aren't always coming into our buildings anymore, because they're able to access the information from their dorm rooms or other places, their laboratories.
Right.
So we have to find ways to reach out to them and to help them understand that we can help them. So we are doing things with our services that wrap around the information that, say, Google or Microsoft might be providing, or the Open Content Alliance. We're trying to be out there and establish technologies. They're really still very much in the developmental stage, but where we can co-browse with somebody on their screen and help them navigate and help them put in a more refined search string so that they'll get better results on these massive databases, or just on the web in general.
Gil, you cross over. Many folks don't know that you are really a librarian by training, even as though you're a CIO. But let me come back to Sandra's point. We're not as good as Google. I mean, is this a modest leap, or is this a huge leap in terms of libraries getting to be as good as Google for that at least initial user interface or user experience?
Well, students don't, as was said, don't go to library catalogs first. They go to Google first. And so we also know that students are willing to take the time sometimes to go through and sort through things. Whether they come up with good results or not is another question. But I think the real challenge for IT organizations and libraries in this case is that it's got to be easier. It's got to have the kind of content you think you need. And it's that ability that Google's taken on to create the repositories of content that's drawing people to them. Now they're grabbing advertising costs off of that and others, but in fact they've realized very early on it is content that's driving it. And they have content in its original form of what students are really after, and of course faculty are after. So that becomes a new challenge, not just searching for libraries, but also making sure that their original content is accessible. And in that sense, every part of the organization is struggling with that, whether it's the administration dealing with organizational documents of a university, or it's the library dealing with collections that are part of their history collection, for example.
Ginny, I want to come back. I want to bring something that you said earlier with what Gil just said. You talked earlier about that expectation for speed, that immediate, and Gil talked about accessibility. We talked about accessibility in the previous segment as well. We all love the convenience of this fast search, and all this stuff shows up and it hot links back and forth. I think I mentioned earlier that there's some data again from Pew that about half the activity into Wikipedia comes from Google. And the fact that the web provides this, search provides us all these other things. What about authenticity?
That is a huge issue that we're dealing with. I mean, there are issues related to who put the information up there and how reliable expert is that individual who put it up there. And
the tags that we see on Wikipedia, there have been some instances of people intentionally, sometimes with mischief, sometimes maliciously, adding incorrect, damaging information on a Wikipedia entry.
That's right, and going back and changing it. If somebody comes in and corrects it, going back and changing it. So that's one set of authenticity issues. Another set is, what if you go to something today that's been digitized that you find on the web? How do you know that what you look at tomorrow is the same document that you saw today? How do you know that you're going to be able to trace back? How do you know that if you're looking at, say, even a dissertation that a university has put up on its website, how do you know that that's really the final version of that dissertation? There are a lot of questions about authenticity, and I don't really think we've answered them satisfactorily at this point.
I'd ask Mike to answer that. How do we know, Mike?
Well, I think what we have to do is we have to reemphasize our efforts in terms of information literacy to include not just how to verify authenticity of materials we find, the value of them, but also to help students understand what constitutes plagiarism. I think there's been a lot of stories about students and plagiarism these days, but in fact, students, it's my sense that students aren't looking to plagiarize, they just don't understand that that's what it is. And so information literacy, very important topic to librarians, is something we have to get in front of students so that they can understand better. Probably won't happen unless we partner with faculty to make that happen, because it varies from discipline to discipline.
Sandra, that variation?
I think students do understand at least a little bit about what they're doing, but I think they also see what they're doing as some form of academic sampling. They don't necessarily call it plagiarism or stealing. It's a mashup. It's a hip hop tune or something where they're taking things from other places and they think that maybe putting them in a different order makes them theirs. But I do think they know at least a bit about what they're doing.
Well,
I mean, I've had,
I was generalizing.
Okay.
Let's shift a little bit. Churchill once said that the United States and Britain were two countries separated by a common language. That's a nice thing. So Gil, you are a librarian by training, but you're also a CIO. And there's this ongoing conversation, discussion, call it whatever you'd like, over the last 15, 20 years to some degree, as libraries become more about digital resources and technology becomes more about the infrastructure to the library. Are these converging organizations? Are these not converging organizations? Are they converging or clashing cultures? Sometimes we see these at different campuses at different times. The evolution, these are merged, they're taken apart, they get put back together. Where are we going with this in terms of the culture and the organizational chart for IT and for computing and libraries, and the fact that they are now in one sense joined at the hip because of digital content and digital resources?
Well, most IT organizations are about services, Casey. So it's really not always about organizational structure. It's about the service that the organization needs. So at the core, the technology is leveled out. We're using common systems with common architecture. We're out of the days of having unique systems in places like libraries. So we're providing common services. We want to extend our networks, extend our wireless networks. We want to provide search tools. We want to provide indexing tools. We know what's good in the library is going to be used other places in our organization. In fact, for a lot of IT organizations and CIOs, the library is a rich repository of assets that we want to extend out so our students can engage in using authentic, authorized materials. They can choose those materials that are not been selected by librarians. They can choose from lots of places. But if they want the stuff that someone has helped them select, we wanted to expose that content, make sure it's part of our Web 2.0 strategy to make it available, extend the content not only to students but also to the faculty. So the library and IT organizations are converging, but they're converging certainly up from the physical layer, going into the application areas, it's all about participation. It's about creating that environment, and then good libraries and good IT organizations are creating those participatory systems so that the librarians get what they need, and the IT organizations are serving that, as well as extending that across all the other areas within the community or the university as a whole.
So is service ultimately going to define these organizations in the future as opposed to culture and content? Is that the case? Jenny?
Well, I would say content will still be defining from the library perspective, but absolutely service is a critical issue. And I think my take on the question you asked, Gil, is that we bring complementary strengths to the table. And libraries are very good at organizing information and making it accessible, findable by people. And the IT tends to be able to deliver that and open it up so that it's out there. So I think working together, we can really expand the access to information.
Sandra, I may be wrong, and my inferences may be way off on this, but it seems to me that some of the barriers that might separate content and culture and research universities and comprehensive institutions may be less evident or less dug in community colleges. Is that a reasonable inference on my part or not? The service orientation on the part of IT supporting students and faculty, library supporting students and faculty.
Well, my library is within the IT department, so I guess there is no separation there, and they're very good at supporting us. But I don't think that's the case with most community college libraries. I think we're in the minority. I think most of them are under the academic affairs, separate, but and begging, I think, more than not.
Let's go back to commercial providers and services for a moment. And again, let's use this elephant metaphor. That elephant now clearly, in what I'm about to say, is Google, and Google Books and Google Scholar. Now, these relationships that Google has established with a number of major research universities to literally scan fast, in mass, millions of books, some out of print, some public domain, some still under copyright. Google Scholar can be a wonderful resource, particularly as some faculty are alleged to operate. You no longer have to go to the index in the book to see your stuff. You just go to Google Scholar to see who's quoting your materials and see where it goes. It's a free citation index. Mike Miller, is there anything not to like about this Google world of content, access, speed, stuff at my desktop, 24/7,
Well, I'm actually very enthusiastic about the Google initiative.
Are you an outlier for the library community?
I don't think so, actually. I mean, I did come from the University of Michigan before Cal Poly. So
and Michigan is one of these programs.
Michigan's one of the flagships. And the perspective there is that it's a public institution. Taxpayers over time have paid for this material.
Right.
And Google is an opportunity to share it much more broadly with the public. And if we look back at copyright, American copyright at least, there's always been the goal of sharing information as broadly as possible. So I see it as a good thing. That said, there are people who have concerns. Publishers would raise the issue of copyright, perhaps.
Right. Well, we've seen copyright law extended, trademark, number of times.
Well, I think for them it's a matter of scanning things that you don't own would be.
Well, that's one part, but it's also the trademark. Disney, for example, is certainly a major force behind the recent extension of trademark and copyright.
I mean, what I hear from library colleagues sometimes is being so dependent on a large corporate entity for what's getting to be more and more bread and butter services.
Right. Jenny, are you on the I like it or the that said?
Oh, I'm definitely on the I
Great
like
thing.
it. Yes,
Nothing not to
but I
like.
think there's that saying about the devil in the details. With any of these projects to digitize information, one of the concerns that we have as librarians is to make sure that the digital copy doesn't result in the print or original copy going away and being discarded, because it's possible that something that's digitized, if it's come from a heavily used collection, might have pages torn out, might have parts that are illegible. And so if we are just simply going to rely on the digital version, regardless of who digitized it and makes it available, we may lose parts of that record. So I think there's some real issues there that we need to pay attention to, and we need to look at the quality standards as well as the standards for access.
So it sounds like there's another conversation about a different level of authentication.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Yes.
And how, if I'm looking at Google Books, how do I know that?
I'm not sure you do, and I think that's one of the issues that is out there today that libraries need to educate not only our students and faculty about, but also our campus administrators.
So my friendly university librarian is going to educate me about how to navigate on the validity and authenticity of Google Books? Is that what's going to happen, Gil?
Well, librarians will, but also there'll be a community that'll do it. Again, the way that users are finding information today means they're talking to each other and sharing. And sometimes librarians are involved, sometimes they're not. Now, part of putting information up and making it available in a communal way may create misinformation, but oftentimes it is self-managing. So you can find very good sites, very good wikis on how to use Google Scholar. It is changing how we think about how we get help and how we have this dialogue, and it is a dialogue about the use of these materials that are easily available.
But it seems that the conversation about the future of the library going away is like the conversation about the future of the book. They run in parallel paths. You know, the library is with us, the book is still with us. It doesn't, for all the conversations about if or when or how. But there's also, it seems to be a little bit of the lowest common denominator. There's a huge archive of stuff on Gutenberg. If I want a copy, for example, of Huckleberry Finn, I can go to any one of your libraries. There's a number of different editions that I can buy from Amazon or my local physical bookstore. I can get an ASCII text and customize it in any way I want as well from Gutenberg. But at some point, are we at the risk of being down to sort of one copy of Huck Finn? That's the only edition of Huck Finn in this environment? Sandra, you're shaking your head no.
I just don't see people giving up their books.
Okay.
I mean, I don't.
Does that include libraries?
Libraries will weed, and they have different missions. At our library, for instance, we support a very, small educational goals. I mean, we support our curriculum, so we're not research.
For example, I'm watching Mike. I'm sitting next to Jenny. You guys are physically not that far apart from one another in terms of your two institutions. In California, we've got a number of state universities, research universities, the community colleges. Pick any one of a number of titles. How many copies exist on any large campus that might have several libraries, let alone all the libraries that are public university and community college libraries in the state of California. Do we need 150 copies or 300 copies of Huck Finn, for example, or Pilgrim's Progress, or I'm not sure what the titles would, pick those things. Do we need those in each library if in fact we can have one copy in each library and lots of digital copies as well? Ginny?
Well, I think it depends the answer, right. Because it depends on a variety of things. One is different editions will have different other material around Huck Finn. For instance, there may be the original text and some critical information that's included. So we would want to be sure that we preserve that. On the other hand,
come on! I've got to believe that most campuses have essentially a lot of generic copies of Huck Finn's, and then scholarship about Huck Finn.
Sure,
and Twain.
I think then the question is: are our users going to read a full-length book in electronic format? And to date, most people that I've talked to, and even looking at the success of the e-book industry,
which has not been all that successful.
That's right. Okay. So I think people.
Sony's gone back to the well 3 times.
Yes, they have, and I think it will change over the next 10 years. But right now, we're not there yet. We're not to the point where people are just satisfied with digital copies of all the books they need to read.
Mike, when does the e-book industry become successful?
Well, it's always been chicken egg. And people, I think, will give up the codex as a traditional form when there's something better to take its place. But the piece of technology and the content that goes in it has been the chicken egg. What's happening now is the content is being scanned. It's going to be there. When that reader comes, that's the equivalent of a literary iPod, whether that's 3 years or 30 years, the content's going to be ready to go. And it opens up tremendous opportunities for publishers to put their back catalogs in where you can't get them in paper form at all.
This still sounds like I know it when I'll see it. A variation on Justice Potter's conversation about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Is that when that future arrives in one sense, Gil?
Well, certainly. I mean, we don't have easy answers to replacing books right now. There's still a need for books. I mean, frankly, a lot of people make money on publishing still.
It's a big business and an important one.
And an important one. However, what is different is individuals now are being able to publish their own materials. They're beginning to put them in different formats. They're willing to take some risks. So the publishing industry is beginning to pay attention. When Amazon rankings for amateur reviewers is becoming more important to them, that additional content is driving a business to make different decisions about how they invite, engage, and participate with new authors. That's when the change will happen.
It's not about an interesting Web 2.0 in terms of user-driven content that now feeds back to a commercial business.
It's not about the readers.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I want to give you each an opportunity to make one last, and I want to emphasize, very quick comment. What's the future of the library 15 years, 20 years from now? Ginny?
I would say it's about information. We are in the information business. We're in the business of understanding our users' information needs and helping connect them with that information. We're not just about books. We are about information.
Great. Sandra, last quick comment, future of the library in 20 years?
Better than it is now, more open, more flexible, smaller.
Mike?
I agree with my colleagues. There are people who fear the end of libraries. I don't see it. I think it's going to be better than it ever was because the emphasis will be more on quality and service than just the collecting of things.
Gil, you get the last word. Future of the library in 20 years?
Well, the library's still a place. It's still a place for people to go to work with other people and to have conversations. I don't think that's going to change. There'll be places for people to work, but I also think they'll be carrying different tools and they'll have different access to different content. The world in 20 years will be hopefully a rich space with a lot of content that people have contributed.
All right, well folks, we've run out of time, and my thanks to the 4 of you, Gil Gonzalez, Mike Miller, Sandra Rotenberg, and Ginny Steele for joining us today, as well as for the panel members for our previous segments of today's program on the future of the library. Thanks very much. 2, for Ready to Net, our thanks to the folks at KTEH San Jose Public Television for hosting this program. We also want to acknowledge the corporate sponsors of the Ready to Net series, Adobe, Blackboard, Nginx, and Microsoft. You'll find the complete video archives of all Ready to Net programs on the web, www.csumb.edu/readytonet. For those of us at Ready to Net, we hope you found this program and our series this year to be useful and informative. Thanks very much for joining us today.
committed to a rich college experience for all. Faculty, committed to teaching and mentoring. Committed to hands-on learning in a great location. Committed to building a campus that enhances the student experience. Committed to real-world learning that contributes to the community. California State University, Monterey Bay, committed to the success of every student.